All right, so let's get started on today's meeting. So what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be doing the first of two parts on displaying data. So today we're going to start with displaying categorical data or data that you collect about categorical variables. And then next time we're going to switch gears to take a look at quantitative data. But in general, we are now going to take a look at how to take a whole bunch of numbers and display them in a way that makes sense to the human mind. So this continues our look at the elevator pitch side of statistics. So once again, statistics has kind of two sides to it. One is inferential statistics, where you take a sample and you try to generalize that to a population. But the other one is descriptive statistics, where you try to describe data in an efficient way that our human minds can understand. And that's the idea of statistics as an elevator pitch. So rather than giving somebody that you are trying to explain something about a whole bunch of numbers for them to take a look through, we recognize that the human mind is terrible at processing and understanding just lists of numbers. We are really, really bad at understanding those things. However, we are great at understanding things like pictures. So we are going to take a look at how can we take our data and put it into more efficiently processed forms. And we're going to take a look at a form that we're going to cover, but I'll mention right now is not my favorite. We'll take a look at tables. And then we'll also take a look at what is my favorite, figures such as graphs and other ways of displaying these massive numbers, again, in a way that makes sense to your human mind so that you can explain really complicated sets of data in just about a minute, or in other words, give the elevator pitch. So we'll take a look today at displaying categorical data. So we'll start with displaying just one categorical variable. And just to remind you, categorical variables are variables where you measure an individual and then that measure places them into a category rather than measuring them, and that measure is a quantity of something that they have. So this is where you measure something and you place it into a category. That's what we're looking at first here with categorical variables. So we'll take a look at how we can display vast quantities of data in things like frequency tables. We'll talk about the cousin relative frequency table. And then we'll take a look at the bar chart and the pie chart. And then we're going to double our pleasure, double our fun by displaying the relationship between two categorical variables. And we'll talk about a two-way frequency table, which has one hiccup that you need to be aware of, and then also the side-by-side bar chart and the segmented bar chart as well. Now, to kind of illustrate these ideas and to take a look at how this is actually used in real psychology research, we're going to go back to 1974, which was apparently a great year for categorical data. And we're going to take a look at two very famous, very influential psychology studies. The first one, Loftus and Palmer, reconstruction of automobile destruction, an example of the interaction between language and memory, where they basically showed that your memory is not just accessed when somebody asks you a question, but it's rewritten depending upon how that person actually asked that question. And then we'll also take a look at Dutton and Aaron, some evidence for heightened sexual attraction under conditions of high anxiety. And that title kind of speaks for itself. So we're going to start with the Loftus and Palmer study. So this was the original publication. And what they did, I'll just read a brief description of it. So they were wondering, how does language interact with memory? So if you're asked to recall an event from your past, does the language, does the question itself, hey, do you remember that time when you did blank? Does that question simply activate the memory and you take the memory out of some repository and then you just recall the information that you have previously stored? Or does that question somehow get incorporated into the memory and change it and interact with it in very interesting ways. So what they did to study this is they showed a film depicting a multiple car accident. And then this film was followed by a questionnaire. So this isn't the actual film, but this is one that was used in a replication of this study. So the film lasted less than 1 minute, and the accident in the film lasted only 4 seconds. At the end of the film, the subjects received a questionnaire asking them first to describe the accident in their own words, and then to answer a series of questions about the accident. The critical question was the one that interrogated the subject about the speed of the vehicle. So the subjects were asked about the speed of the vehicle, and there was 3 conditions for this. So the experimenter would come in after the subjects had watched the video, and 50 subjects were asked about how fast were the cars going when they smashed into each other. So 50 of them got that question after they had completed their questionnaire. Another 50 separate subjects were asked about how fast were the cars going when they hit each other. And then the final 50 subjects, they weren't asked about the actual speed of the cars. So we have 3 conditions here. We have 3 categories. Are you a subject that is in the category smashed into each other? Are you a subject that's in the category hit each other? Or are you a subject in the category where they didn't ask you about the speed? Now, they did record the speeds that the subjects responded with. That is not what we're going to focus on today because that is a quantitative variable. So we're going to focus instead on another categorical variable that they had, which was that they brought these subjects back after the experiment 1 week later. So 1 week later, the same subjects were brought back, and they, without viewing the film again, they answered another series of questions about the accident. And the critical question that they asked each and every subject in this 1 week later follow-up was, did you see broken glass? So the subjects who 1 week earlier were asked, how fast were the cars going when they smashed into each other? Now they were asked, hey, did you see broken glass? And the subjects who 1 week earlier were asked about how fast were the cars going when they hit each other, they were also asked, did you see broken glass? And then finally, the ones that were not asked about any vehicular speed 1 week ago, they were also asked, did you see broken glass? Now, this is a categorical variable because it's either yes or no. So some of them are going to be in the yes category, some of them are going to be in the no category. So that is the categorical variable that we're interested in. And we have the categorical variable of what was the type of question that they were asked. All right, so what did they find? What was the data? Before we go on, I will say that in the video that they used, there was no broken glass in the actual accident. Wasn't any broken glass at all. So if they saw broken glass, if they remembered seeing broken glass, that was because their memory had somehow been rewritten by the language that was used. And the only language that was different between the 3 conditions was the one that was asked a week earlier. Smashed into each other, hit each other, or no question at all. All right, so that's the setup. Any questions on the setup for this experiment? All right, let's take a look at what they found. So this is their data in a frequency table type of display here. So we have, for example, here we have the response. So did they respond yes or did they respond no? That puts them into one of 2 different categories. And then we also have the question verb, the verb condition, as another category. So were they in the smashed group? Were they in the hit group? Or were they in the control group? So what we want to do is we want to be able to see what is the distribution that this variable takes. So to kind of simplify this, we're going to focus only on the yes responses. So we don't want to introduce 2 categorical variables right now. So we're just going to focus on the one, just focus on the verb condition. And how do we display the data of this verb condition? So we want to display this because oftentimes you get a lot of information by how a variable is distributed. And that distribution of a variable tells you what value each variable takes and then how often it takes each value. So in this case, we have the values that the variables can take, which is smashed, hit, and control. And then we have the frequency, or how often do they take each value, which is 16 people in the smashed condition said, yes, I see glass. 7 people in the hit condition said, yes, I see glass. 6 people in the control condition said, yes, I see glass. So in this case, what we have here is known as a frequency table. And a frequency table simply displays or shows the number of individuals that have each data value from your experiment. So again, it shows us that 16 of these individuals in the yes condition saw glass or remember seeing glass in the smashed condition, 7 in the hit condition, and 6 in the control condition. So that's a frequency table. Another type of frequency table, which we're going to see, foreshadowing, is very, very useful, is known as a relative frequency table. So this is a basic frequency table, and then you can also do a relative frequency table by simply dividing how many people in each condition were there. So there were 29 individuals in the smashed condition. There were 29 in the hit condition. Sorry, that's not right. There was 29 total individuals who saw broken glass. That's what I was going for. 29 individuals who saw broken glass, 29 individuals who saw hit and who saw broken glass in the hit condition. I'm going to back up one more time. Let me get this backed up one more time. All right, so we want a relative frequency table. And this is basically me telling on myself how often I use tables. I love graphs. We'll get through this. All right, so in a relative frequency table, you want to show the proportion or the percentage of individuals that have each data value. So you take a look at the total number of individuals that are responding, and then you divide each frequency by that total number. So we have 16 individuals in the smashed condition, plus 7 individuals in the hit condition, plus 6 individuals in the control condition. That's 29. That's where that number came from. And then we simply divide 16 by 29. We divide 7 by 29. And we divide 6 by 29. And then that'll give us a relative frequency table where instead of just numbers, we now have percentages or proportions. So now we know that there's 55% in the smashed condition. So of all the people that said yes, 55% were in the smashed condition, 24% were in the hit condition, 21% were in the control condition. All right, so that is the relative frequency table. Going back now to this frequency table here. Frequency tables are very, very useful when you want to report the actual data. When you want to report the actual numbers that you found, a frequency table is a great way to organize the data because I can simply look at this and I can know immediately, oh yeah, 16 people in the smashed condition said yes, they saw glass. 6 people in the control condition said yes, they saw glass. But visually, to our minds, we don't really understand numbers that well. Now, you may think to yourself, well, no, I understand numbers, but it's very hard to visualize numbers a lot of time. And when we take a look at numbers like this, oftentimes we'll take a look at the size of the actual pixels that are representing the numbers rather than the actual numbers, and those are the impressions that we get. So we're very good at kind of judging pictorial area, not so good at judging numbers. So if I wanted to just report the numbers for somebody in my research paper to take a look at, that would be a great way to do it. But if I want to kind of show them the impact of what these numbers mean, a table is usually not the best way to do it. And what you want to do is you want to use something like a chart. So what we're going to do right now is we're going to take a look at a bar chart first. And in a bar chart, what it does is it shows each category and it shows each frequency in that category as a bar. So first off, it shows each category. So here on this x-axis, we have every value that that categorical variable can take. So we got smashed, we got hit, we got control. Those are the 3 categories that the subjects were placed into. And then on the y-axis over here, we have how many of them said yes. So the frequency that they said yes, I see glass. And then what you do in this chart is the height of each bar above each category shows the frequency of that category or the relative frequencies. So we had 16 individuals who were in the smashed condition that said yes, they see glass. So we would have a bar height that reached all the way up to 16. And we had 7 individuals for the hit condition. So we would have a bar that goes all the way up to 7. And then we had 6 individuals for the control condition, and we would have a bar that goes all the way up to 6. Now, in this case, it's very readily apparent that there was way more people mistakenly remembering broken glass when they were asked how fast were the cars going when they smashed into each other than for the hit condition or the control condition. In fact, those two conditions don't even look like they differ at all. So visually, this tells us it's a much more impactful way to communicate the real finding of this data, which is that the smashed condition made a huge difference in how many people had distorted memories of seeing broken glass. But the hit condition and not asking any questions about it gave a much smaller effect of rewriting that memory in an incorrect, false way. So again, this is much more readily understandable than a table is. It takes a lot less time for your mind to decode it. The downfall of this, though, is that if you wanted exact numbers, you would have to take out a ruler and you would have to start measuring things. So you would have to measure the height of that bar and draw a line over to the y-axis for the smashed group, and you would have to see that it intersects at 16, and then you'd have to draw the height of the bar for the hit condition, draw a line over to the y-axis to see that it hit at 7. It's kind of hard to just visually tell, well, is the hit condition, is that 7, is that 6, is that 8? So it's a little hard to get the exact numbers, but in terms of understanding, hey, what's going on, what's the distribution of frequencies in this study, it's much more readily apparent when it's in this visual format. All right, so that's a bar chart. The other way that you can display categorical data that is often used is a pie chart. So here we have a pie chart here, and in a pie chart, each category gets its own section of the pie, and the size of the slice that it gets is proportional to the frequency with which it occurred in your data. So in this case, we have the largest slice of pie being given to the smashed category. The hit category has a much smaller slice, very close to the size of the control category. And oftentimes when you have a pie chart like this, you will want to put the actual values in the actual figure itself, because unlike a bar chart where it's pretty straightforward to reconstruct or re-extract the data from a bar chart, for the pie chart, you're going to need a protractor and you're going to need some probably trigonometry, and most people just don't have those lying around. So it's a very good idea, again, because we're trying to give our elevator pitch of what this data is telling us. It's a good idea to actually put your values into the pie chart. All right, so that was the pie chart. That was the bar chart here. And again, this was a finding that was very influential, and it shows that questions do not just activate memories. They do not just bring memories out into your conscious mind so that you can report on them. Questions actually rewrite how you store and retrieve memories. So once again, it made a difference in this study whether you were asked a week earlier, did the cars smash into each other? Did the cars hit each other, or you had no question about the speed? It affected people's recall a week later when they falsely recalled, did you see broken glass in a later period of time? So this was a hugely influential study that had massive impacts in terms of law enforcement. So you can imagine being on a witness stand and your recollection of an event, which could determine somebody's future, can be changed with as little as one word being changed in the question that the lawyer asks you. So how fast was the car going when it smashed into the other car? Objection, Your Honor. Rewriting the witness's memory. That is what Loftus and Palmer showed in this particular study. And it also gave more evidence, and this was a new idea, something that's much more commonplace now, thank goodness. It also gave more evidence in terms of the fact that false memories can occur at all. So there was a time when people did not believe in the idea of false memories. They believed that your memory was fallible, but that fallibility was that you could forget things, right? Maybe something happened and you forgot that it ever happened. But what wasn't fallible was whether or not something that you remembered actually happening. So while you could forget something that happened, you could not misremember something that never happened. That was just not part of the current thoughts. And because of that, there was a lot of suffering in terms of the recovered memory, repressed memory therapy outcomes in terms of the satanic panic in the 80s. We won't go into that right now, but there was a lot of hardship because we did not understand memory. And Loftus and Palmer were one of the first ones that gave us this insight into your memory is fallible, and the way people just even ask questions can lead you to misrecall something very profound. Any questions on that before we leave Loftus and Palmer and go to another 1974 study? All right. If we have time at the end, I'll give you one of my favorite Loftus memory experiment stories, but we'll see if we got time for it. Because right now, it is time for some evidence. I like this title, just some evidence, a little bit of evidence for heightened sexual attraction under conditions of high anxiety. So this is a study by Dutton and Aaron. And basically, if you have ever wondered why horror films are so popular as a date night option, right? If you ever wonder why teenagers especially love going to horror films and will go there on a date night, this experiment actually answers a lot about what happens to your own feelings of sexual attraction when you are placed under heightened conditions of high anxiety. So what is it that they did in this experiment? So the first thing to know about this experiment is that the individuals that were studied, the individuals that were tested, they were males. So there were no females in this study. That was by design. It was only males that were studied, and male passerbys were contacted in this study either on a fear-arousing suspension bridge. So this is an actual photo of the actual bridge that was used in the study. And this is the Capilano River suspension bridge, and that is in the Capilano River Regional Park up in Vancouver, British Columbia. And so this was the bridge. So male passerbys, they were contacted on either a fear-arousing suspension bridge or a non-fear arousing solid wood bridge. So you were either contacted in an extremely scary situation, or you were contacted in a much less anxiety-inducing situation. So that's one categorical variable that we already have. Were you on the suspension bridge when the experimenters talked to you, or were you on the wooden bridge when they talked to you? And then they were stopped on this bridge, and they were contacted by an experimenter for an interview. And the interviewer on each bridge was either a female interviewer or it was a male interviewer. So male individuals in this study, they were contacted on the suspension bridge. So you're walking across the suspension bridge and somebody comes up to you and says, hey, I would like to ask you some questions. Would you be willing to answer this questionnaire? And the person asking them was either a female or it was a male. So we had female interviewers on the suspension bridge, male interviewers on the suspension bridge, and then we also had a female interviewer on the wooden bridge, and we had a male interviewer on the wooden bridge. So then the question becomes, well, what happens when they interviewed these subjects? So the first categorical response measure, the first variable that they measured was, did the person actually complete the questionnaire? So when you were on the suspension bridge and somebody came up to you and said, hey, can I ask you some questions? Would you be willing to complete this questionnaire? Did they say, yeah, I got some time, I'll do the questionnaire? Or did they say, oh, no, thank you, have a nice day? So on the suspension bridge, did they complete the questionnaire? And did they complete it when a female asked them? And did that change if a male asked them? And then on the wooden safe bridge, did they complete the questionnaire? And did that change when a female asked male subjects or when a male asked male subjects? So that was part one of the experiment. Part two was that the interviewer, at the end of the questionnaire, the interviewer thanked the subject and then offered to explain the experiment in more detail when they had more time. So at this point, the interviewer tore off the corner of a sheet of the questionnaire, wrote down their name and phone number, and then invited the subject to call them if they wanted to talk later. And now the question became, well, did the person actually accept the phone number? And then did they call later? So on the suspension bridge, female interviewer, questionnaire is finished, tears off a corner, writes down their name and number, and said, hey, would you like an explanation later? And here's my number. So did they accept the phone number? And then later, did they call? So they measured that for female interviewers on the suspension bridge, male interviewers on the suspension bridge, female interviewers on the wooden bridge, male interviewers on the wooden bridge. So you can see that we now have numerous categorical variables in terms of the responses of the subjects. Did they complete the questionnaire? Yes or no? Yes puts them in the completion category, no puts them in the no completion category. Did they accept the phone number? Yes or no? Puts them into two categories. And then later, the last one, did they actually call the phone number later? And then again puts them into a yes or no category. So this one here has got a lot going on. And what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at it and we're going to break this thing down piece by piece by piece to take a look at how to understand, number one, what's going on here. And again, the importance of being able to display categorical variables. All right, so let's take a look at the actual data here. Oh, before we do that, everybody clear on the scenario? It's all good? All right. So let's take a look at the data here. So this is the data from the actual study. So again, this is a frequency table. And in this case, what we're going to do is we're going to break down this table into, I don't want to throw shade at at Dutton, and I can't remember the other experimenter, but this is not the greatest table in the world. It's not really made in a way, I mean, it's efficient in terms of space, but it's not efficient in terms of understanding, because what they do is they combine multiple categorical variables into the same table rather than making multiple tables for the one for each categorical variable. So that's what we're going to do, because this is an intro to statistics course. So we're going to take this rather complicated table and we're just going to break it down into each of those categorical responses. And we're going to start with how many filled out the questionnaire. So just before we get to this, just to go back here, if I gave you these numbers here and I said, hey, what do you think happened in this experiment? It would probably take you a good 5, 6, 7 minutes to really get to the heart of what was going on. With a table like this that we're about to see, it'll take you maybe 1, 2 minutes to see what's going on. With the bar charts that we're going to show later, it will take you all of 20 seconds once you understand bar charts to see what's going on. So again, you want to pick the display that is most efficient in communicating your message to the person that you are writing for. All right, so first, we have a frequency table. In this case, we have a two-way table. So a two-way table is a table of frequencies, much like the frequency table that we just saw, but it summarizes the relationship between two categorical variables for a group of individuals. So if you remember when we were taking a look at the Loftus study where they asked how fast were the cars going when they smashed into each other, they had people that responded, yes, I saw broken glass, and people that responded, no, I did not see broken glass. We got rid of the no to turn it into a one categorical variable frequency table. Now we're going to up the complexity a little bit. We got a two categorical variable frequency table. So the two variables are, number one, the bridge type. Were they approached on the suspension bridge or were they approached on the wooden bridge? And then number two, who approached them? Was it a female interviewer that approached them or was it a male interviewer that approached them? So now we're going to be able to see the relationship between those two variables. So the first data that we're going to extract from their rather complicated table is for bridge type, female, suspension and wooden, interviewer, female and male, how many filled out the questionnaire? And this is the data right here. And if you were to take a look at this, you would rightfully say, well, nothing really happened, right? We got 23 people on the suspension bridge. When they were approached by a female, they said, yeah, we'll do the questionnaire. 22 on the wooden bridge, when they were approached by the female, said, yeah, we'll do the questionnaire. 23 on the on the suspension bridge, approached by a male, said, we do the questionnaire. 22 on the wooden bridge, when they were approached by a male, said they do the questionnaire. It doesn't really look like anything is happening. And you would be correct in assuming that, except for the fact that I displayed this data in an incorrect way. And I did that to make a point that when you are using a two-way frequency table, when you're doing a two-way categorical frequency table, you always want to use relative frequencies rather than the actual frequencies. So what we have up here is the actual frequencies. And I apologize for this because I lied to you a little bit. What we have here in the original data is a very, very bad way of displaying relative frequencies, because these researchers said, well, hey, we have a rather complicated frequency table here, and we're experienced researchers, and we know that we're supposed to be putting up relative frequencies. So how about instead of us doing those calculations, how about you do a little bit of math? Yeah, because that's great for the human mind. You have numbers that you're already having trouble understanding, and let's just throw more numbers at you, and we'll make you do division to put that in the mix as well. So not the greatest idea, not the best way to communicate this, but very nicely illustrative that when you do these table of frequencies, these two-way tables, make sure that you use relative frequencies, especially if the actual subjects in each category do not have exactly the same number. So here we have on the wooden bridge, 33 people were approached. On the experimental bridge, 33 people were approached by the female instructor. But on the wooden bridge by the male questionnaire, 42 individuals. We have different numbers, so we have to use relative frequencies. So what does this look like if we actually do that? Well, here were the actual frequencies. To get the relative frequencies, we just take a look at the percent who said that they would fill out the questionnaire. So out of the people that were approached, what percent said that they would fill out the questionnaire? And here we are again talking about the percent of people in each category. So suspension bridge, asked by a female, 33 individuals were approached, 23 said they'd fill it out. For the wooden bridge, female interviewer, 33 were approached, 22 said that they would fill it out. For the male suspension bridge, 51 were approached, 23 said that they would fill out the questionnaire. Wooden bridge for the male, 42 were approached, 22 said that they would fill it out. those relative frequencies are that right there. And now you can start to see a little bit more of the story that is being told here. Now you can start to see and think to yourself, well, okay, there's a story here for the difference between a suspension bridge and a wooden bridge. And is that story different for a female interviewer that is approaching these male subjects versus a male interviewer that's approaching these male subjects? And again, I'm not a fan of tables. They're great for exact numbers, but they're a little difficult to really even make sense of what might be going on here. However, what you can do is you can compare these groups using a side-by-side bar chart. And a side-by-side bar chart shows that distribution of a categorical variable for each value of another categorical variable. So the way that you do that is one of your categorical variables becomes the x-axis. So in this case, we're going to put interviewer, female interviewer, or male interviewer. That goes on the x-axis here. Your other categorical variable, and I don't have a nice little green box to come up here. Your other categorical variable will be in the legend, and it'll be the colors of your bars. So each bar gets a color depending upon whether it's on the suspension bridge, that's going to be a red bar, or is it on the wooden bridge, that's going to be a blue bar. So one of your categorical variables goes on the x-axis, the other one gets different colored bars. The relative frequencies go on the y-axis. So the higher the bar, the greater the relative frequency, the higher the proportion of people in that category that in this case completed the questionnaire. All right, so what does this data actually look like? Well, let's start with the wooden bridge. So that's the data there for the wooden bridge. And in this case, it becomes readily apparent that there seems to be a slight difference in terms of how many people actually completed the questionnaire, with the female interviewer having a higher completion rate than the male interviewer. So more of these male subjects were willing to complete a questionnaire when a female interviewer asked them than it was when a male interviewer asked them. That's on the wooden bridge. And then we can ask ourselves, well, does that story change for the suspension bridge? And there's the data for the suspension bridge. And as you can see, it's pretty much the same story, right? So on the suspension bridge, still more individuals stopped for the female interviewer and completed the questionnaire than individuals stopped for the male interviewer. And in this case, visually, you can kind of see that effect. More people completed the questionnaire for the female than completed the questionnaire for the male. However, visually, that's what it looks like, but we are not sure yet if that is a real difference or if that's just a chance difference. And what I mean by that is that we don't know if this pattern of data would occur again if we tested this on another day. And we don't know if this pattern of data would occur for a third time if we tested it on a third day. So we don't know how reliable this data is. That's what inferential statistics will tell us. That's all going to be later. But in terms of just our goal of making an elevator pitch, this is a nice way to display the data where people can readily understand, okay, suspension bridge is in the red. I can see that data there. Wooden bridge is in the blue. I can see that data there. And you know what? It kind of looks to me like the male interviewers had less people filling out questionnaires than the female interviewers. I wonder if there's more there. So it's a great way to kind of get into your data and start seeing what's going on. The last thing that I'll just mention before we head on to the next type of chart is that when you choose your bars and you choose a color for your bars, choose something that culturally is agreed upon in terms of what it is that you're trying to communicate. So in this case, when I was choosing the bars for this, the suspension bridge, that's the high anxiety bridge. That is the dangerous bridge. That's why I chose red. Because red is a color that in our culture, in our society, signals danger. It signals high anxiety. Red sort of means there's trouble. Suspension bridge is red, reminds your mind, oh, this is the bridge that is dangerous. The wooden bridge, safer bridge, calmer bridge. I'm going to choose blue for the wooden bridge bars. And this is just something that you're probably not going to see in a lot of statistical textbooks, but it makes a difference. It makes it a lot easier for the people that are trying to understand your elevator pitch if you make everything consistent. So take a little bit of time and think about, well, what is a good color for this bar? What is a good color for that bar? Sometimes they're not going to be anything that can make that much of a difference, but in this case it is. So red for the suspension bridge, that's the dangerous bridge. Blue for the wooden bridge, that's the calm bridge. And it just makes it so much easier for your mind to digest this information. Okay, so this is the side-by-side bar chart. Another way to display two categorical variables is a segmented bar chart. And what a segmented bar chart does is it basically takes the categorical variable of interviewer and stacks the other categorical variable into one huge bar. And that huge bar takes up 100% of the area above the female interviewer, for example. And then where it's cut off shows the relative frequencies between the two conditions, the categorical conditions. So for the female interviewer, the bar above, the red shows what percentage of males on the suspension bridge completed the interview compared to how many on the wooden bridge completed the interview. And then the same thing on the male side. Now, you're going to kind of be able to tell from the time that we spend on the segmented bar chart that I'm not a big fan of the segmented bar chart. I don't think this is in any way an improvement over this. I can't really think of a situation that I've ever encountered where this would be an improvement over this, but it is something that you will come across. So again, it's that distribution of the categorical variables, and it takes those two bars that are over the female category, stacks them on top of each other, and then squishes them down till they reach 100. And then it takes the two bars that are over the male side, stacks them on top of each other, and squishes it down until it reaches 100. Great for comparing, I guess, within the female category or within the male category. So wooden bridge to suspension bridge in the male category, but not so great comparing across. So not my favorite one. And that is the last you will see segmented bar charts in this course. Okay, so that was the result for did you complete the questionnaire? That was just one categorical variable. The next one was, did they accept the phone number? So again, at the end of the questionnaire, the interviewer wrote down their name, wrote down their phone number on a corner of the paper, tore it off and said, hey, if you have any questions, you can call me later and I can give you more details. Did the person accept the phone number, or did they say, hey, you know what, no thank you, I'm good, and just continue walking on the bridge? So again, in this case, there are the frequency data in the table. So did you accept the phone number? Here's the frequency table data. But once again, we need to have the relative frequencies. So those are the actual number of individuals that got to this stage. So this 22 here comes from this 22. So 22 filled out the questionnaire, and then of those 22, 16 accepted the phone number. These 23 on the suspension bridge completed the questionnaire, and then of those 23, 18 accepted the phone number. And I can continue saying this in this way, and you can imagine just how horrible it would be for me to try to explain what is going on here by just continuing to say, and of these 22 who completed the questionnaire. So rather than doing that, let's get to the frequency table once again. Once again, we have bridge type suspension wooden. We have interviewer female male. This time we are going to display how many accepted the phone number. So we have, once again, a story for the female interviewer. where the difference between the suspension bridge and the wooden bridge doesn't seem to be very large. We have a story for the male interviewer where the difference between the suspension bridge and the wooden bridge doesn't seem very large. We could compare down the other columns as well. That's one of the things you can do with a frequency table. However, once again, just looking at this data, it's not relatively apparent. It doesn't kind of really pop out to you, right? 78 and 30, 73 and 27. Those are just kind of, again, in our mind, not numbers that we can very readily understand what their impact means. I don't mean that you don't know what 73% is versus 27%, but visually it's hard to process that. And we have a lot of our brain dedicated to visual processing. So why don't we use it? And instead of having it in a frequency table, we once again put a side-by-side bar chart. So now you can see, in terms of the percentage of individuals that accepted the phone number, a massively larger number of individuals accepted the phone number from the female interviewer than the male interviewer. A larger number of those subjects said, you know what, I will take that slip of paper with your number because I am interested in knowing more details of this. Way more did that when it was with a female interviewer than it was with a male interviewer. However, one thing that this also makes readily apparent is that so far, there really doesn't seem to be much going on with the suspension bridge and the wooden bridge. So we made a big deal at the beginning of this discussion that the subjects were either approached on this really scary suspension bridge or they were approached on this really safe wooden bridge. And we were going to answer a question about why are horror movies so popular as a date night option. And so far, we don't really see much of a difference between the suspension and the wooden bridges. Those red and blue bars above that female interviewer category, those are about the same, right? Those are exactly the same size. The red and blue bars above the male interviewer, those are exactly the same. Those are just about the same size. So far, it really doesn't seem like that anxiety that gets induced on the suspension bridge is really doing anything. Wouldn't it be great if that final measure actually showed something? Well, let's take a look at it. All right, so the final measure that they had was out of the individuals that accepted the phone number, how many of them actually called? And if you're still in the dating scene and you've ever given your phone number out and they don't call you back, just know that this has been happening since 1974. But there is hope if you can find yourself a suspension bridge. So anyways, this last column here, this is the number that actually phoned. So once again, we have the absolute frequencies, right? Over here, we can't use these because we're doing two categorical variables and their interaction. So what we need to do is we need to once again get relative frequencies. And once again, this 16 here comes from the 16 individuals that accepted the phone number. So out of those 16 individuals, 2 individuals phoned. Out of the 18 individuals here on the suspension bridge with the female interviewer who accepted the phone number, 9 of them actually ended up calling. And then we have the same for the male on the wooden bridge and the suspension bridge. So we need those relative frequencies because otherwise we'd get a distorted picture and we would communicate a distorted picture of what actually was going on. So once again, this table here, not the greatest for understanding what's going on, asking you to do division. Much easier to understand how many phoned later on a table that has the single measure reported. So once again, we have female interviewers, and now we can kind of see that there was a big difference between the suspension bridge and the wooden bridge. We have male interviewers, and we can see that there seems to be less of a difference between the suspension bridge and the wooden bridge. And the story of this really comes from this result here. And once again, you kind of start thinking, okay, yeah, that's 50 versus 13%. That's going to be a big difference. But again, it just doesn't have that impact that something like this has. So when you see a chart like this, and you take a look at the number of people that are actually phoning, first off, let's start with the male interviewer. You can see that the suspension bridge had more calls than the wooden bridge did. So if you accepted that number on the suspension bridge, you were way more likely to call that interviewer later than you were if you did it on the wooden bridge, if they were a male interviewer. But if you take a look at the female interviewers here, it was massively higher number of individuals calling when they were approached by a female on the suspension bridge compared to any other situation. And very impressively, even compared to the female interviewers on a wooden bridge. So in this case, they are taking the measure of did they phone as a operational definition of did they feel sexual arousal for this interviewer. Okay, so just to be clear on that, whether or not they phoned, these researchers took that as a measure of whether or not they experienced sexual arousal and were sexually interested in the particular interviewer. So as we can see here, on that suspension bridge for the female interviewer, there were way more individuals that actually phoned after taking the phone number than did on the wooden bridge. So there is something about being in that high anxiety situation that somehow communicates to your mind that you are particularly interested in a sexual arousal manner. I always find this weird when I'm trying to talk about this in a very objective way. You are particularly interested in this interviewer. The actual high anxiety that you're feeling on the bridge gets tangled up with those feelings of arousal, and your mind misinterprets it as being interested sexually in that particular interviewer. So once again, there was no difference between the females who were on one bridge versus the other bridge. The only difference was the actual bridge. So that fear-inducing bridge led to way, way more people calling back than the non-fear-inducing wooden bridge. So I guess the take-home message for this is that if you are giving out your number to somebody and you want them to call you back, if you are in a very calm environment, you might want to say something like, "Oh, hey, you know what? Let me give you my number." Boom, and then that'll be a horrible way to close, but that'll increase maybe your possibilities. Okay, so that was that study. Any final questions, comments, things on this? All right, so that was some evidence for heightened sexual attraction under conditions of high anxiety. So what we saw today is we saw different ways to display information, pros and cons of using a table versus using a graph. And again, whatever your goal is when you're trying to communicate with somebody, you want to choose the way of displaying that data. But the big take home is that your mind is not made to understand numbers, unfortunately. It would be great if it was. Your brain is not made, your mind is not made to understand numbers. We understand numbers much more easily if they're organized well, like in a frequency table or a relative frequency table. And we understand the patterns of data way better if they're put into a chart, like a bar chart, a pie chart, or that side-by-side bar chart. Now, before we wrap up, I promise if we had a little bit of extra time, which we do, I would give you my favorite story of the work that Elizabeth Loftus has done. So if you are interested in just how insidious false memories can be, Elizabeth Loftus has a huge career with tons of research on just how little it takes to influence your memory. So back in the late, maybe mid 80s, early 90s, there was a epidemic of repressed memories in therapy coming out and people misremembering trauma that they had experienced as a child, abuse that they had experienced as a child, because of the therapeutic techniques that the therapist was using, specifically leading questions that were creating these false memories, much like the how fast were the cars going when they smashed into each other. They were asking questions in a way that made them falsely remember abuse or trauma that had not occurred. And to just show you how easy this is to do, there was a Loftus study. It was a case study where she found a family that had a young boy, and she interviewed that family. And the research was done ethically. I don't want you to think that this was some kind of shady, underhanded thing, but it was all done ethically. And the family agreed to be in the study. And she interviewed the family about this child's history. And I believe the boy, he was a young boy. He was, no, his age actually doesn't matter. And I can't remember if he was young or not. This is a great way to tell a story. But anyways, so they're asking this boy, and they asked the parents. She interviewed the parents before to get the child's history, and she found out that this child had never been lost at the mall. So at no point in this child's history did they ever go to the mall and lose track of where their parents were. And I don't know if anybody here has ever been lost at the mall. I've been lost at the mall. It's scary when you're a little child and you don't know if you're ever going to go home again. So it's something that, you remember. They asked the family, they asked the parents to make sure that this child had never been lost at the mall. Parents verified it. So then they start the experiment. They have interview number 1, and they did a series of these interviews. So she has interview number 1, and she's just asking him different questions. Oh, you know what? Tell me about, first grade. Tell me about your teacher in first grade. Oh, yeah, my teacher in first grade, I remember she was like this, she was like this. Oh, okay. Tell me about, a Christmas gift that you remember getting. Oh, I remember one year, I got a bicycle, and it was, I couldn't wait until the summer to ride my bike. She's like, oh, yeah, that's great. Why don't you tell me about that time you got lost at the mall? That was it. And in the first interview, the subject, he said, yeah, I was never lost at the mall. Never happened. Next question. Tell me about, that time that you went to the park and blah, 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 whatever. That was the first interview. A couple of days later, second interview. Once again, asking him a biographical question. Tell me about this. Tell me about that. Once again, put in the question. Tell me about that time you got lost at the mall. And the subject said, oh, I didn't get lost at the mall. That never happened. And the interview continued. Third interview comes to do the same procedure. Come to the question. Tell me about that time you got lost at the mall. And I don't know on which interview exactly it happened, but at some point, just by repeatedly asking, tell me about that time that you got lost at the mall, the subject eventually was like, yeah, I remember. I remember this time we went to the mall, and my parents, they told me to hold their hand, but I remember seeing this toy that I really wanted, in the store window. So I let go of my dad's hand, and I was looking at the toy. And then when I looked up later, my parents were gone. And then in the next interview, tell me about the time that you went to the mall. And then all of a sudden, more details are added. Oh yeah, I remember it was our mall in our small town, and we were walking by the Toys R Us, and I saw this toy that I really wanted in the window, and I think it was like this transformer that had just come out. And then I let go of my dad's hand, and I couldn't, I didn't know where they were after a while. And this really nice policeman came by, and details just started getting added to the story. And it was so convincing. And this boy was so sure of this memory by the end of it that when Elizabeth Loftus told him that this had been an implanted memory and that he had never actually gotten lost at the mall, he did not believe her. And when she played his early tapes for him of the interviews, he thought that they were edited in some way. And he was sure that he had been lost at the mall. And she never planted anything more than just saying, hey, tell me about that time you got lost at the mall. And eventually he just filled in the pieces and came out with this entire story, and now this entrenched memory about that time he got lost at the mall. So this kind of work, very, very important to help us understand how our minds work. And even though it's very important, one last idea that I'll leave you with, this work, there are many examples of this type of work getting buried for decades because it's written poorly. And poor writing includes poor graphical displays or table displays of data. Because if you have to look through this study and you get to that table and you're going to see all those numbers and all that division that you need to do, all of a sudden your mind is going to say, you know what, I got a stack of 20 papers I got to get through to, brush up on my psychology knowledge. I'm just going to kind of skim this. All right, yeah, some evidence for heightened sexual attraction. That's great. On to the next paper. Things get buried if you don't communicate them effectively. So make a note, try to communicate effectively, learn how to read these graphs, learn how to read these tables, and you'll make sure that the important work that we do and the important work that we get done actually has the impact that it's supposed to have. All right, so that is all that I wanted to cover for today. Any final questions before we wrap up? All right, so that is it for today. So today we did displaying categorical data. Next time we're going to be looking at displaying quantitative data, and we're going to take a look at a couple of more studies. But until then, we are done for the day.